What is going on, everybody, and welcome to my review for Silent Night, Deadly Night. This is a remake of the 1984 cult classic B movie, which is a film that I watched for the very first time a couple of days before seeing this one, just so I could get a little bit more familiar with the source material. And I was actually pretty surprised at how much I was able to enjoy it, because given the era of slashers that it came out in and its B movie status, it's got a certain griminess and rough around the edges style to it that I don't typically find to be the most enjoyable to watch, but at its core, it has an interesting concept. The practical effects, given its limited budget, were actually pretty impressive. And so even though it had its fair share of flaws, overall, I found it to be a pretty fun watch. But when it comes to this remake specifically, I didn't really know what to expect going into it, because outside of checking out the original, I didn't do much homework or digging into it beforehand. I didn't even know who was directing or starring in it. The only reason it did land on my radar is because it premiered earlier this year at Fantastic Fest, and a few content creators that I frequently watch were able to see it at its premiere, and some of them had some pretty good things to say about it. And so given that I am such a massive slasher fan and I always enjoy a good holiday themed horror experience, I decided to take a chance on it, go in blindly, and see what it had to offer. And I'm really happy that I did, because I think this might go down as my pick for most surprising movie of 2025, and it is a really strong contender for best slasher movie of 2025 as well. It does everything that I feel a good remake should do. It completely scraps everything that didn't work in the original, all that stuff that's just a little too rough around the edges in my opinion. It modernizes its style so that it can be enjoyed by today's audiences, and then it takes that core concept and improves upon it with newer and fresher ideas so that it can justify its own existence and you don't feel like you're just getting a one-to-one copy of that original film. The main example of this are the changes they make to the main character Billy. They keep the beginning of his origin story the same, where he witnesses his parents be murdered by someone dressed in a Santa outfit, but they change the long-term effects this event taking place has on him. In the original, he sees his parents die, he's got Christmas-related trauma, he gets thrown into an orphanage, and then a decade later, once he's an adult, he snaps one day when a Santa outfit gets put onto him and he starts to kill people that he deems have been naughty and deserve it. But I found in the original that this motive and his victim selection is a little flimsy, because it does start to feel like he kind of just starts killing whoever he wants. And so that's an example in that original film where I think the concept is very interesting, but its execution is very inconsistent. In the remake, after witnessing the death of his parents, he essentially absorbs the spirit of the killer. And so when we catch up to him after the time jump, he's not just some quiet, traumatized young man. He's a full-fledged Dexter-like serial killer who is guided by the voice of his parents' murderer to target those who have actually done wrong and evil things. And just with that alone, they clear up a lot of those inconsistencies that I feel are in the original, but they also make the character far more interesting and one that you want to be invested in. It also creates that conflicting feeling within you, that the kind that you get when you do watch a Dexter-like character, where you are rooting for them and you want to see them succeed, but you also have to realize that you are rooting for a serial killer who is hurting people. And so you just get a far more compelling version of the Billy character in this movie than I feel you get with the original film. Sticking with the character of Billy, I also have to give major props to the actor playing him, Rowan Campbell, because I was introduced to this man when he played Corey Cunningham in Halloween Ends, and that's about the worst possible way I could be introduced to an actor, because I hate that character with every fiber of my being, and I hate that movie because of that character. And so ever since then, every time I've seen this guy's face, I am just reminded of the hatred that I have for how the Halloween trilogy came to an end and how it was so focused on this character that nobody cares about, that I really haven't been able to forgive him, and I have held it against the actor that played that role. But I think with this movie, I can finally say he has redeemed himself, and even though Corey Cunningham, the character, will never be in my good graces, I think Rowan Campbell, the actor, is okay in my book now. So shout out to him. If you are a fan of that original film, then I think you'll be very happy to see that this one maintains its Christmas spirit and sense of humor. There's a lot of splatstick comedy in this movie, and it's another example of why I feel so strongly that the horror genre is doing comedy in film far better than the comedy genre is itself. This is some of the most laughter I have gotten out of a movie in all of 2025. There's a sequence in particular that I don't want to give any details away because it is so outlandish and out of nowhere that it works best if you don't see it coming, but you will know what scene I'm talking about when you see this movie the second that it begins. It is just so good, and one of my favorite individual moments that I've seen in a movie all year. It's also the sequence where you get the most gore, which the kills and gore are abundant in this movie, and from what I could tell, they were mainly using practical effects during all of them. If there was any CGI being used, I really couldn't tell at all, so shout out to the special effects team, and it goes a long way to really display the brutality of your killer and make them feel like a threat to their victims. But it also creates a nice counterbalance to the more lighthearted Christmas aspects of the film as well. My main criticism for this movie, however, is not something that I necessarily feel lowered my level of enjoyment for it, but it is something that I couldn't help but notice for pretty much the entirety of the runtime. And there are even some points in the movie where I couldn't help but laugh at it because it's so blatant. And that is that this is a movie that really wears its influences directly on its sleeve. And there are moments in the movie where I feel they are even following the path of these influences a little too close. Like I made the Dexter comparison earlier, but that was just scratching the surface. It's a little bit more than a comparison. It's kind of a blatant one-to-one copy. He pretty much just is Dexter in a Santa Claus outfit. By day, he works a normal job, and then by night, he is out stalking and killing victims who have hurt others. And much like how Dexter collects the blood slides from his victims, Billy collects the blood from his and marks them in an advent calendar with a victim for each day of the 24 days leading up to Christmas. And it's one of those things where it's like, I did like it and I did think it was fun, but I do have to knock them a little bit for it because there's just no attempt to deviate from the path of that character structure in even the slightest. Another example of this movie's influences maybe being a little too obvious is the dynamic between Billy and the killer spirit that talks to him. It's very similar to the dynamic between Eddie Brock and the symbiote that we see in Sony's Venom movies. And so this is now a couple of things that I was noticing in this movie that felt eerily similar to that of other projects. And so though they are elements of this movie that I got a lot of fun out of and really enjoy, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge them because it definitely toes the line of inspiration and imitation. My only other critique here is that there's this subplot going on in the background about some kids disappearing around the county at the hands of what the locals call the Snatcher, and it kind of just feels a little tacked on in my opinion. It doesn't really fully get dove into until the latter third of the film, and even by the time we get there, I don't feel like I've been propped up enough to care about it enough. And given that it is the catalyst that triggers the conclusion of this film, I wish that I could have been made to care about it a little bit more throughout the entire runtime and not just the last bookend of the movie. But I do think the movie's ending is solid enough that I would only consider this to be a small critique, and it's not an issue that I have with the film that I think will really have too much of a negative impact on the viewing experience of anybody watching it. So there you guys have it. Those are all of my thoughts for the remake of Silent Night, Deadly Night. This was a very pleasant surprise for me, and as a slasher fanatic, I feel like Christmas came a few weeks early this year. I could definitely see this movie landing in my holiday rotation for the many years to come. So I fully recommend that you guys go check this movie out and that you check it out in theaters. I think it'll be a really fun time for whoever you go with for this very special time of year. When you do check this movie out, make sure to come back here and get down in the comments below and tell me what you thought about it. I would love to hear from you guys. Also, if you're into movie reviews like this, make sure to please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel, and I will see everybody in my next one. Peace.